Hey, it is Monday, Snowmageddon Monday, if you're in most of the country. You are here at Litvak Leadership Live, and I'm here with my new good friend that I'm so happy my cousin introduced me to. Let me introduce you to Tim Thomasson, who is with Public Safety Management Group. And when I say with, he is one of the principals there. So with it is probably an understatement. Tim, how you doing today?
Doing good. We're here in New Orleans where it's 32 degrees and the city's having to activate their freeze plan. So we're getting a little of that chill ourselves, Sean.
Oh, my. So now, before we get into leadership, it's, isn't it Mardi Gras week?
It is. It is.
Okay. And what is, because, and I know this because I picked up punchkis for my mother-in-law the other day, which is a Polish sweet. You probably know what it is. It's like a jelly donut, but
Ours is the king cake.
Huh?
We have the king cake version.
The king cake version. Okay. And so, what is happening in the age of COVID with Mardi Gras week?
Well, quite frankly, it boils down to the discussion that you have every day on your blog. One, the city is pretty much in complete lockdown mode. They had spent months in phase one trying to keep folks safe and flatten the curve. We're successful at that. They began to reopen in the late fall, and unfortunately, we're doing really well. And then the city really, in my mind, didn't have a really good plan of how to deal with Mardi Gras. They were being optimistic, encouraging people to make their plans to come to the city for Mardi Gras, but then they didn't really have a good, solid plan to keep people safe. So as of last Friday, all bars, restaurants are pretty much closed. No loitering outside of the public venues. And they're having to enforce that pretty heavily because they kind of waited to the last minute. And I know the city's been overwhelmed with, first of all, cyber attack late in 2019, then the collapse of the Hard Rock Hotel in early 2020. And then, of course, they had Mardi Gras, which spread the coronavirus very fast. And the city was probably one of the top four hardest hit cities in the nation. So I know they've got limited bandwidth, but we've known Mardi Gras was coming for a year. We should have had probably a little better plan for keeping the economy open and protecting the patrons and the people in the city, because the city is near broke and needs all the funds they can get.
Sure. I mean, and I live in the Louisville, Kentucky area, and although we don't have Mardi Gras, we have Derby. And, Derby is a 2-week event, the Derby Festival. And, this year they're talking about for the Derby Parade, which, would have thousands and thousands and thousands of people lining the streets. They're not doing it that way. They're going to bring it to you. They haven't quite explained what that means yet. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. So I'm glad my city is taking somewhat of a proactive approach. So why don't you share with my viewers in a couple minutes of exactly what you do?
So we're Public Safety Management Group is kind of a boutique, full life cycle emergency management company. We do emergency planning, we do training, we do drills and exercises. We'll come in and help test and validate a police department or a small municipality's ability to handle a large event or a complex incident. Part of that life cycle is preparedness. It's getting the resources you need. So we write a lot of grants for police departments, fire departments, sheriff's offices, nursing homes, corrections, 911 centers. A lot of times these towns are built on tax revenues or millages, and they know they have risk and they want to mitigate that risk. And sometimes they'll develop a plan, but then realize in that plan they're missing a lot of the resources and equipment they need to solve those problems. So we've spent a lifetime of writing grants, which often helps pay for our services. And then, but we've been engaged from, as I like to say, we start at the planning and preparedness side. We try to help find ways to mitigate. Our bread and butter is the response aspect. We've had people in New Jersey, Louisiana, North Carolina, Texas, Alabama, Florida, Arkansas, helping, whether it's at the State Department of Health and Hospitals or at a municipality, or even help run a temporary mortuary facility. So we're kind of that boutique life cycle of emergency management. We're a small veteran-owned company that we have probably 400 plus seasoned emergency managers that have been incident commanders on large wildfires, on oil spills. I myself have done 3 Super Bowls, helped mitigate the risk at those facilities. Worked with the NFL off and off for 10 years, PGA, a number of large events when we're not in the middle of disaster mode. But we do everything you kind of need to plan, prepare, and respond to a disaster.
So, you see a lot of leaders or a lot of people who have been given authority and a lot of people who have been puffed up on authority. So I throw all that out to say, how do you define leadership?
I've seen it from some of the world's best leaders I could ever imagine. And then I've seen, the other end of the spectrum. So to us, leadership, particularly in a crisis, is making sure you manage your people and let them do what they're trained and expected to do, and make decisions rapidly if they're not capable of doing those functions. In crisis leadership, you cannot control everything. There is no opportunity to micromanage. You ever try to micromanage a hurricane, you'll learn really quick that it's just not capable of being done. And one of my predecessors, Colonel Terry Everett, who actually is the Homeland Security Director for the city of New Orleans, a fabulous leader. He's served in the Marine Corps for years, and as you all know, MacArthur said the best plan goes to heck as soon as the first contact with the enemy. Yeah. But I used to love Colonel Everett's guidelines that if you can communicate, if you can get the logistics in place, and then you can delegate leadership by objectives down to most junior leader, then you can survive any disaster. And I think that's where we've been challenged this year. I'm never going to second guess a governor, a mayor, or senior leadership, but I find in all the states I've worked this year and in the last few years, we failed to rely on the experts who are trained and practiced in disaster management, in emergency management. When it's a healthcare crisis, it's good that we know to return to our commissioners of health and hospitals and our secretaries of health. But you also got these highly trained firefighters, highly trained police captains and majors who make a career out of learning how to use a rapid planning and response process to solve a problem. Yet everywhere I go, I see them missing in the key leadership and the key unified command, as we call it, in every major state. I think that's been one of our challenges here as we respond to this pandemic. You've got to turn to those senior leaders that know how to manage a life cycle of a disaster. A person can manage a hospital and be a epidemiologist, and that subject matter expertise is crucial. But someone has to manage the life cycle of a disaster, and we have failed to do that.
So when you say manage the life cycle of a disaster, I compare it to where my career is in the janitorial industry, and I talk to a lot of people who lead facilities, and it's funny, and I'm not going to name any of them, but they end up being handed what the plan is for their facility for reentry by all these C-level executives when they're the facility subject matter expert. What advice do you have for individuals to rely on their subject matter experts that may not be sitting in the C-suite?
It's funny you say that. I'll remember an incident in Bryan Mound, Texas, where the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, one of their 4 key sites, had been pretty well destroyed by the Category 4 hurricane. I believe it was Hurricane Gustav or Hurricane Ike. And as we were pre-staging in a hotel north of there, we were missing the facility manager, the one guy who knew more about the facility, the ins and outs of it. And to me, it was well worth waiting a 24-hour period to get him inbound, so that when we got on that facility, we knew all the key tricks and trades to getting that facility open. You've got to rely on your subject matter experts. If you don't have confidence in them, terminate them and get somebody in there before a disaster happens. You can do that during a disaster too. Listen, we all know this. You can be great at managing a facility or managing a building or managing a town, and in the middle of a disaster, you've got to be able and willing to let people take their strengths and capabilities and put them to work.
Yeah.
If you don't, The disaster is going to manage you.
So why do you think that individuals, and I have my own opinion of this, because and I think any leader worth their salt has struggled with this at some point. Why do you think some leaders don't allow those who know more about a subject to speak up, and they feel like they need to lead the charge themselves?
Well, I think it comes from two things. In my world, I call it blue sky day and red sky day. When you probably got elected in those positions or appointed those positions because you're really good at either managing blue sky day. I mean, you're good at leading. You can be really good at leading people and watching the bottom line. And in business, you have to. If you're not growing a profit, then you've got to make those decisions. And we can do that well sitting behind the desk and even getting out and leading from the front in a business. But when you switch in a minute to what we call red sky day or COVID day as
Right.
today, we may not have the toolbox for that. It's okay in my mind as a senior leader to say, I don't understand that gap. Can someone step up to the plate and help me understand that? In our world, in the all hazard incident management team world, we rely on subject matter experts. All hazard means all hazard. There's no way I can be an expert at airplane crashes, at tornadoes, at flooding one day, and then deal with a freezing ice flow that's flooding a city to 3 and 4 feet the next day. The only way you really do that is bring in subject matter experts. And I think sometimes as leaders and managers, we get stuck in the blue sky day and don't realize we're not trained and practiced. And that's a term I like to look at when I'm on an incident. Who is the most practiced person at the problem I'm dealing with? I remember being on an oil spill one time, very large complex oil spill. You probably remember the Deepwater Horizon Macondo 252 oil spill that leaked millions of barrels a day into the Gulf of Mexico. And for 4 or 5 days in very far end of the world, St. Bernard, Louisiana, we just could not get our boom laid out in a manner or fashion that would stop the oil from coming ashore. And we had some very seasoned oil spill managers. But it was the day we finally said, listen, we're not dealing with oil spill. We're dealing with the Gulf of Mexico. And we brought in 3 seasoned fishermen who understood those currents. They were trained and practiced on understanding what the water was going to do and what that oil would do in that ocean. They weren't trained on how to put T-angles on boom or deflective boom or whatever, but by partnering those seasoned fishermen in each sector with a seasoned oil spill manager, we managed to start deflecting that oil and get it under control to stop some of the damage on the wildlife and the fisheries.
So this next question is going to sound completely facetious and like I'm baiting you, okay? But I'm not. So based upon what you just said, by bringing in the experts on the Gulf, people have been highly critical of the vaccine rollout. And we've all heard the joke, depending upon the part of the country you're in. If Portillo's, which is a hot dog chain and Italian beef chain in the Chicagoland area, or Chick-fil-A was in charge of bringing people through a drive-through to get vaccinated, or if we trained Amazon delivery people to vaccinate people, we could get everything done in 2 weeks. Now, I'm not saying we go to that end, but isn't there something to be said for those organizations that are super efficient like that? They may not know about the pandemic, but they certainly know how to move people through it in an efficient way.
It's funny you say that, Sean. Early on in July and August, before I left New Jersey, I was making recommendations very similar. Let's use the Walgreens of the world. Let's use the McDonald's of the world. They've got the facility set up. They have drive-through. They have parking. And if you watch what's happening in the last 14 days, we're seeing a lot of these mass vaccination sites move into outdoor venues, stadiums. And if you think about it, it's the perfect place. You got plenty of room for social distancing. You've got people who have facility managers, logisticians, communicators, parking. They know how to deal with product in and out in a fast, short turnaround. I know, having been in and out of the Louisiana Superdome numerous times, they can have an NCAA college basketball game on a Saturday and hold an NFL football game on a Sunday. There are amazing moving parts to turn that floor and that facility into an NFL stadium in 24 hours. But they're well trained and well practiced at it. Let's use those experts that are trained, practiced, and by the way, credentialed a lot of times to do
Mhm.
logistics, to do communications, to do vaccines. They even have medical facilities on those facilities.
So Chick-fil-A, if you're listening, you need to contact the government. Um, just saying, I went through a Chick-fil-A the other day with an order for 15 people, and I was literally in line 4 minutes from the time I got in line to the time I got my food in my vehicle. And it was
And
a
you know what
long.
they do? They evolve. If they find their lines are going too long on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, they're the best risk managers in the world. They buy property and they add a fourth drive-through line, or they add additional buffer zone to the line so they can get your order quicker and get you out quicker. They add additional staff and resources. And and this is where I think, again, back to that term of trained, practiced, credentialed individuals. If you bring some of those trained, practiced, credentialed individuals, whether it's into the senior leadership of your business, any business in the country right now is pretty much is in crisis mode, most of them, especially
Mhm.
those that are shut down and trying to reopen this summer, like a lot of the venues that you and I were talking about. You know, there are simple, easy ways to get some of these venues opened up. And I'm glad I stopped yesterday to watch the track and field competition in Staten Island, New York. Here we are having a track and field competition prior to Olympics coming up soon. And they were not only in that same facility running a mass vaccination site, they were running a community based testing site, and they brought all these athletes and worldwide media into that facility. And it was great to see. They had all the resources they needed right there. And I think that the NFL tried to take a step in that right direction. The NFL has resources. I love seeing them not minimize the Super Bowl to 3 and 4 and 7,000, but go through the hard work, the practice, put the funds up, buy the product, get people tested days in advance so they could put 22,000 people in that facility. Unfortunately, the city probably should have done a little better planning for the nighttime parties and celebrations.
Right.
But the NFL lives and dies, we like to call it, having those cameras turned on. And if we, as elected officials, as politicians, as first responders, looked at it with the same eye that they had, meaning the city's bottom line in the city I'm in right now is busted. It'll be 10 years before they are anywhere close to the general fund that they had prior to COVID. And if they don't get new solutions to open up these businesses quicker, get butts in seats in a safe and effective manner,
Mhm.
I think there's 2,100 businesses in the city of New Orleans already gone bankrupt.
Now,
There won't be.
and you talk about bringing people back into public facilities. And, before we got online with everyone, you and I were having a conversation about some grants that are out there that people may not be aware of. Tell us a little bit more about those.
Yeah. So, particularly one you and I were mentioning is the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, which was signed into law on the 27th of December. Unfortunately, with the change between administrations, the final guidance has not come out from the Small Business Administration. But that is a $15 billion program to help these small shuttered venues get back up and operational. So think less than 500 employees, less than 50 million a year revenue streams. This is a perfect little grant that once the SBA finally releases the guiding documents and how you apply for that, essentially it's going to replace 40 to 50% of your revenue that you've lost. That's on top of any PPP or idle loan you may have gotten. And the goal there is to let these venues buy the products and services they need, get their staff tested, put kiosks in place to check temperatures and check and hire cleaning companies to come in and clean those
Mhm.
facilities, purchase new technology like HVAC cleaners, which can clean the air in a few minutes and make sure the virus is not floating around in the air. You'll buy the masks. I kind of set up some masks as a sample background here so you didn't have to stare at my wall. There are some fabulous, fabulous tools out there. I'll just take a moment not to show a particular product, but these are rapid test kits here that tell if you have the antibodies. In 10 minutes, I can tell if you have the antibodies. We've got rapid test kits that in 15 minutes can tell you if you have the virus. Sure, they're 95% effective, but they're $20 a pop. We get stuck in this mindset of having this, you've got to wait 2 to 5 days for a result. We don't need that right now. What was happening in Staten Island yesterday, these folks were getting tested as they walked in the building and wait 10 minutes, and then they went right out onto the floor and started practicing for their sport. To me, there is no reason we can't be doing that in venues. Sure, we might need a year or two before we 100% capacity, but it takes leadership and it takes decisions to get these tools and resources in place to reopen these venues. And the sooner we do, the better our mental health is going to be.
Oh, yeah.
So those grants are fabulous tools. And that shuttered venue operations grant has been signed into law now for almost 2 months, but yet we need leadership at the SBA to get those documents out the door so we can get those funds rolling out to these small venues.
So what do you think is something that leaders can be doing to help their communities? Specifically, when you talk about mental health, when you talk about that it's going to be, your own words, a year or two till we get to 100% capacity, when President Biden the other day said masks for a year, as like a throwaway comment that Twitter erupted on. Things like that. When you look at the show Last Man Standing, if you're familiar with that show, they did, and I think this is the second time in 2 shows I've brought this up, they did a time jump to 2023 because they said, well, we're sure that by then everything will be normal and people won't be walking around with masks. What can we do to help people now, as leaders, to bring that normalcy along as quick as possible, as opposed to walking around as a masked society?
You nailed it. We've got to talk about it. We've got to talk honestly and sincerely about where we're at and how we get to the next level. Listen, I see Governor Cuomo, who I think has done a fabulous job making some tough decisions throughout this incident. And I've had a front row seat to him and Governor Murphy and some of the senior leadership at the national level. So I can say that, but he made some horrible missteps apparently with the communication about how many folks we were losing in our nursing homes.
Mm-hmm.
We can't hide the fact that we killed a significant amount of our population. I'm not saying we killed them, but the coronavirus is a deadly virus, and it was those folks with special needs and older folks were very susceptible to it. But I can't tell you how many times I've been in conversations with senior leaders, and they say, "I don't want to own that problem. It's a nursing home. It's owned by the public. They're privately owned." Well, you own the problem whether you want to or not. The best thing we can do is talk about the problem and talk about solutions. I remember going into some nursing homes where all the communications were in English, but most of the staff cleaning the facility were Hispanic or spoke other languages. I remember seeing people get arrested because they came into work with COVID, but didn't ever really understand that once I had COVID not to come into work, that I thought the mask was protecting me. And, we've got to talk about the problems. For example, I'm not shy to talk about the city of New Orleans, where I love and I appreciate everything that the mayor and the leadership of the city is doing. But you can't wait till the Friday before Mardi Gras and decide to shut down the city.
Right.
That's not communicating the issues. That's not bringing in technical experts and helping find solutions. And to me, I guarantee you, all of those businesses in New Orleans would have helped pay for or bring in extra staff, cleaning, guidance, spread the city out into further to make that event happen, because they know they got to do it safely, but they need to get these businesses reopened. So an example to me is you've got all the wonderful supplies in the world, rapid test kits, hand sanitizer that doesn't even have alcohol in it. We've got a product that kills the virus up to 4 days once it's applied to your skin. Yeah, but we've got to talk about these things. We can't just pretend they don't exist, or we'll be here 2 years from now still trying to deal with coronavirus.
Why isn't that stuff at Kroger?
It is at Kroger, actually. Surprisingly enough, the Kroger buys that product. It's called DAB. I don't know if I can say that on here, but yes, Kroger is actually the first one to make a large purchase of that particular product. Okay. But we got to talk about those things. I remember back in June talking to our MetLife Stadium folks about, hey, we can reopen. Now, they made the decision, and rightly so, that was their risk benefit, not to put bodies back in that stadium. But, New Orleans took 3 months, but they finally put 3,000, 4,000 bodies back in that stadium, and they probably could have done more. Until you talk about it, to experiment with it, we're going to be sitting here, still wanting to get outside the house. I think it's important to understand that, and I think you get it. The mental health and well-being of the entire United States right now is probably worse than it's been since World War II. Oh, yeah. I don't have any facts, but I suspect not only are the general population 25, 30% self-medicating and depressed and anxious about what's coming in their future, many of our first responders are in a worse situation. So it takes leadership to understand that problem and fix it.
I mean, there's anecdotal statements out there that, as people are on Zoom meetings all day long, 50% of people on meetings have been drinking earlier in the day before they get, have I done that? No. Do I know people who've done that? No. Could people have done that? I've heard people say some goofy things at different times. I mean, and you got your big drink there. So,
just kidding.
So when we're communicating strategy as leaders, because, if I read one more time on social media, put on your damn mask, okay, that's not the answer. Allowing yourself to get overwhelmed with emotion is not the answer. And I'm not in a role to be a decision maker in this, but I am certainly in a role to be an influencer in this. So how do you think that people who are in roles of influence can help society move forward so we're never going to be how we were? Okay, virtual is here to stay, but let's bring in person back too, and then people can bounce between the two. Okay, you see what I'm saying there? How can the leaders out there who are not in roles of accountability but are in roles of influence help?
Well, we got to communicate. I was frustrated the other day, and I saw for the 1,000th time the guidance from CDC to wear a mask, keep 6 feet apart, and wash our hands. I think the American public is smart enough and can take more guidance than that. It can take more, but you've got to lead. The CDC should have matured to this point now, telling us how we reopen these venues.
Thank you.
And if the CDC doesn't have the solution, they should be bringing in subject matter experts to find the solution.
Yeah.
So senior leaders, we've got to hold them accountable. Listen, right or wrong, whatever the investigation turns out in New York, Cuomo had tough decisions to make, and I'll never second guess him. But we've got to hold people accountable. I've been in nursing homes where the administrator was the person spreading the virus. Okay. And I would share that with the owner, and I'd call back 3 months later, and that administrator is still doing the same job. These people are got to be held accountable. The federal government took over a few nursing homes this year that were veteran-owned or veteran clinics in New Jersey. I think a joint commission had to take over a nursing home called Endover, where the leadership at the facility, the town, the county all failed because they just weren't communicating the honest, sincere truth. We can't get away from it. Let's talk about the real problem, and let's create an objective. And I like objective-based management. From the Marine Corps days, we used to call it commander's intent. The intent is to take the hill so we can keep the enemy from moving any closer. In this environment, we've got to have objective-based goals that are specific and measurable and actionable. And we got to tell our staff to meet those goals and set a timeline for them. We ought to have set timelines right now to reopen these venues at 25%. I'm not saying it's got to be tomorrow, but we have businesses going bankrupt. Let's set goals and objectives by this summer, midsummer, to have these venues reopened to 25%. Once you set that objective, now the facility owner, the manager, the marketing team knows they're going to have to spend time, money, and resources, bring in technical experts, and find a solution to do that. These mayors of these cities and these governors have got to stop reacting based on what they're calling their R factor, or how many spread they have per 100,000. They've got to start setting goals and objectives to reopen these jurisdictions safely.
Well, and it's not even just venues. I'm sure what you're saying can be applied to schools, okay, can be applied to the office, for businesses. I mean, these offices are just commercial office space is just, in decline.
Yeah.
Whereas manufacturing seems to have figured it out how to manufacture those things that society needs. Well, do people not need to go back to the office? And should we be looking at different uses for these spaces? Or is there some other function to be done, or some other way to do it, just like with the venues? But you don't hear about these people going back. The can just keeps getting kicked further and further and further down the road. So who do you think is ultimately accountable to, start a rallying cry on this? Is it the local county government?
I think it's all of us. I think we've got to stop waiting on this thing to solve itself. We've got to just assume this is not going to go away. We all know SARS-CoV-2 has been around for years. We just happen to have a new variant of it, and now we probably have 24 variants of it. So,
Yeah.
listen, I'm not saying we're going to have to wear a mask for the rest of our life. I would not be surprised that we will always have an embroidered or a cool company-based logo as an accoutrement to our attire now, as a prophylactic, so that one day if we do run into or encounter the problem or spread, we can wear it. And I suspect our first responders. Listen, let's accept it. You're going to have to deal with coronavirus for a few years. So we're going to be putting these tools in our vehicles and our cars, and firemen are going to be showing up on the scene, and medics are going to be showing up on the scene for 2 or 3 years, worrying about the potential spread of COVID. But if we're not communicating about it, we're not going to solve it. I'll give you an example. I tested a random test a couple of weeks ago of folks who had the first round of the vaccine, and to me, it was less than 50% effective. We know we're going to have learning curves. We know the vaccine is going to work in some areas. We know it's going to help us mitigate the spread, but it's not going to be the end-all solution. We as Americans are some of the smartest people in the world. We're going to find solutions. Let's create objectives to get back to some level of normalcy and start meeting those objectives. We've got to spend money to do it. I think that the current administration is going to inject some of that money into the economy with these grants. There's a $84 billion grant for colleges and schools to get reopened. But we've got to get the word out and set objectives to get them back in school. It's going to help us all economically, mentally, physically, and we all want to get back to some level of normalcy. It's just like prior to 9/11. We have a new normal. Let's talk about it, let's accept it, and let's move towards it.
And let's figure it out. So we've gone 32 minutes on a 30-minute show, which is kind of my trademark line, and you've been a great guest. So here in the final couple of minutes, I'm going to turn it over to you. No question afterwards. What advice do you have for people to move ahead?
Well, let's encourage at the lowest level, whether it's in your office, to your boss, to your small town mayor, your county administrator, to start reopening these jurisdictions and find the tools to do it safely. They're out there. We talk about some of them on our website on www.psmgus.com. We do a newsletter, so folks would like to come to our website and sign up for that newsletter, that we talk about some of the best practices. But until we hold our leadership accountable, whether that's the facility manager, whether that's the local police chief who manages 25 police officers, whether that's our town mayor, our county administrator, or all the way up to our governors, we all have got to communicate. It's time to reopen, and the solutions are there, folks. We've been having rapid antibody test kits since May the 4th. We've been having rapid antigen test kits since late April. These are 10, 15-minute solutions. Let's start using the smart people in the United States and worldwide and this technology and get back to some kind of normalcy. I think you got to communicate and hold our own leaders accountable.
I could not agree more. And everyone needs to be all in instead of just complaining.
Yeah.
So, Tim, thank you so much for your time today. Lot of good information, especially in the age and situation in which we find ourselves now. Real opportunity for people out there to be the leader that either A, they want to be, or B, that they know they are, and influence where society is going. That's it for Litvak Leadership today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, another topic, another part of the country, but someone just as knowledgeable. That's it, everyone. Have a great day and be blessed.